Hi, and thanks for watching another instructional video for CSCI 1300. In this video, I will be covering an implementation of structs in C++ using input from a text file. I have a txt file called students.txt that has two pieces of data on every line representing a name of a student and a score from an exam. And the goal here is that we want to store all of this information at one piece of information or two pieces of information per line as a single student object. And we're going to be doing that through a struct, which I've defined here as struct student. A struct will basically have three variables inside of it. We'll have a string for the student name and an integer for the score. We're also going to keep a third variable called passed, which is going to be a Boolean variable, which we'll have to evaluate as we grab the scores for each student. And we're going to assign that so that we can see which students passed and which failed at a glance easier. So in order to actually use our struct and create objects, we're going to have to use file IO on our txt file, and we're going to have to then store that into some kind of a structure. So I've got a split function here using substring to basically split the information on the line. I've got a menu function, and I'll go over that in a second here, but I really want to start with my main to show you what I do. So after I've defined my struct for my students, I have a template on which to work off of. I know that there are 20 lines in the file representing 20 different students, so I'm going to create an array called class roster of size 20. And this will be of our struct type, which is student. So we're going to make a class roster of 20 objects of the student data type. I'm also going to create a temporary object called person of the same struct student type, and I'm going to use that to input all the information into each one of these locations in the class roster, just to make it very apparent what's happening here as we go through the program. So I open the file, I do everything that I would normally do with file IO. I split the information on the line after I grab it, and then here, once I've split the information, this is where things get a little bit different from, say, using classes and built-in public functions. I can assign the name within the struct of a person. We have this student person, which is a single object, so I can assign the name of that object using the .name operator here directly without using a public function. So a of 0, which is going to be the first piece of data on the line, such as Abigail, will be the name of that particular student. So that gets stored using the .name operator. And the same thing can occur with the .score operator. So I'm accessing the private variable directly using a dot operator instead of through a public function. I'm then going to convert that information because score has to be stored as an integer. So I'm converting from string to integer. I am then going to see if the score is greater than or equal to 70, so that way I can see if the person has passed or not. And what I do is I update the passed Boolean variable, which is our third variable within our structs for our objects, to true or false based on this evaluation. The person, after getting all three pieces of data stored using the dot operators, is then placed into the array class roster at some index location representing the number of students that we have, which should be the number of lines in our file in this case, which should be 20. And that way we have an object that now has value stored within it inside of class roster. Okay, so let me go over what I'm doing next with the menu function just to show you how I'm actually accessing the contents of each one of these objects. So I call a menu function by passing the class roster and the number of students, which is the size of that particular number of objects that are stored. I'm then going to print out the entirety of the file. So I'm going to grab all of the different values from all of the different students and their scores, and then I'm going to print the passing and failing scores separately by checking to see if past is true or false at every index location. So you can see here that what I'm doing is I'm using the dot past on the index. So basically I'm going to the class roster at index where there is an object at the ith location and checking to see whether the past Boolean variable is set to true or false. And if it's true, then I print the names and scores of the students who have passed, and false if I have students with failing scores. And lastly, I'm also going to show you how to do a return value for an object of struct data type. So here we can see that we have this function called NewStudent, which has a data type of student, similar to what we've seen before with integers or strings. We're returning some data type here, and that data type happens to be object type student. So we can return a single student object from NewStudent, and this would be if we had, say, in a situation where we needed to add a new person to our class roster. We can create a new person, get their information, and set their information to base values similar to a constructor, and then return that information back to our program. So down here at the end of my main, after I've called menu, I then create a new student using that function, and we catch that object in person and reuse it. So we're basically overwriting a temporary student object called person every time through our file information, and also afterwards when we create a new student. And then what I do here is I print the name of the student using the dot operator, because we can directly access that student's information after we get it. And if I wanted to, I'm going to go ahead and print their score just to show you that we have blank information here. And as well, I'm going to also print their past information in the Boolean variable. So I'm going to go ahead and run the program here and show you what I'm talking about. So the first thing that I do here is I print out the class exam scores for the entire roster. So we can see that we get everything from the file, we store it as objects, and we print it through our menu. We then print all the students with grades that are 70 or above, and all the students who failed as the opposite. And if I wanted to, say, input a new student, I could then do that, and it would show me whether the student passed or failed. Of course, here we're actually printing a Boolean variable, so it's printing as 0 because it has failed. That's all I've got right now on Structs. Thanks for watching, and happy coding.